Red and blue lights violently strobed across the pristine walls of the upscale suburban garage, casting long, erratic shadows. A black woman stood beside her luxury SUV, cornered by two aggressive police officers with their hands hovering dangerously over their holstered weapons. They thought they had caught a brazen burglar, red-handed in one of the wealthiest zip codes in Maryland. They demanded her identification, eager to make an arrest. Instead, the gold-embossed federal credentials she handed them would not only freeze the blood in their veins, it would dismantle their entire precinct. Rain lashed against the windshield in steady rhythmic sheets, turning the winding, tree-lined roads of Chevy Chase, Maryland, into a slick black mirror. For Jasmine R. Langston, the heavy weather was merely background noise to the exhaustion sinking into her bones. In her early 40s, Jasmine was at the absolute pinnacle of her career. As a Deputy Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division of the United States Department of Justice, her days were spent in windowless conference rooms in Washington, D.C., dismantling systemic corruption, unsealing federal indictments, and holding massive municipal institutions accountable. She had just spent long hours locked in a tense negotiation regarding a massive consent decree involving a major East Coast police department. Her mind was a tangled web of constitutional law, civil rights statutes, and the sheer administrative fatigue that came with being a high-ranking federal prosecutor. All she wanted was a hot shower, a glass of Cabernet, and her bed. She signaled left, the quiet ticking of the blinker, the only sound in the insulated cabin, and turned onto Somerset Terrace. It was an exclusive enclave, a neighborhood of sprawling stone colonials, manicured lawns, and silent winding cul-de-sacs. Homes here easily cleared the multi-million-dollar mark. Jasmine had purchased hers recently, a testament to decades of grueling academic excellence at Harvard Law and relentless litigation work. It was her sanctuary. But sanctuaries, as Jasmine well knew from her line of work, were often fragile illusions. 2 houses down, the heavy velvet curtains of a living room window twitched. An elderly widow who served as the self-appointed neighborhood watch captain stood in the dark. She had a long, documented history of calling the local dispatch for suspicious activity, which more often than not simply meant anyone who didn't fit her narrow, antiquated view of who belonged in Somerset. Through the rain, she saw the dark SUV pull into the Langston residence. She had never bothered to meet Jasmine, despite Jasmine having lived there recently. In her mind, the homeowner was usually a white corporate executive who traveled often. Seeing a black silhouette behind the wheel of a luxury vehicle pulling up to the dark, silent house was all the confirmation she needed. She picked up her cell phone and dialed 911, her voice hushed and panicked. "Yes, police. There is a vehicle pulling into the driveway at the Langston residence. The owner is out of town. I think someone is breaking in. Please hurry. They look dangerous." Ignorant to the invisible machinery of racial profiling already spinning into motion, Jasmine pressed the button on her sun visor. The heavy mahogany garage door groaned and began its slow ascent, revealing the brightly lit, immaculate interior. She eased the BMW inside, put the car in park, and let out a long, shuddering sigh. The engine cut off, leaving a ringing silence in her ears. She pressed the button to close the garage door and leaned over to gather her briefcase, a heavy leather satchel containing classified DOJ files, her federal badge, and her laptop. As the garage door began its slow descent, the blaring, unmistakable wail of a police siren shattered the quiet of the neighborhood. Jasmine's head snapped up. Through the rearview mirror, she saw the blinding flash of red and blue strobes reflecting off the wet pavement of her driveway. The descending garage door suddenly jerked, stopped, and reversed. Someone had broken the safety sensor beam at the base of the tracks. Footsteps slapped heavily against the wet concrete. Before Jasmine could even unbuckle her seatbelt, a maglite beam violently pierced the tinted driver's side window, blinding her. Someone was hammering on the glass with the butt of a flashlight. The strikes were so forceful Jasmine feared the glass would shatter inward and spray her face. "Police! Shut the engine off and show me your hands. Do it now!" A voice roared from the other side of the glass. Jasmine froze, her heart hammering against her ribs, a primal response to sudden aggressive danger. But within a fraction of a second, the seasoned prosecutor in her took over. The adrenaline was suppressed, replaced by a cold, calculating and terrifyingly calm hyper-awareness. She knew the statistics. She knew the case files. She knew exactly how quickly a misunderstanding in a dark garage could turn into a fatal tragedy. Slowly, deliberately, she raised both hands to eye level, palms open and facing the window. "My engine is off," she said, though she knew they likely couldn't hear her over the rain and their own shouting. "Open the door. Step out of the vehicle with your hands up. If you reach for anything, you will be shot." There were two of them. She could see their silhouettes against the flashing cruiser lights. One was at her door, the other flanking the passenger side, hands resting ominously on their duty belts. Jasmine took a deep breath. She didn't reach for her purse. She didn't reach for her cell phone. Using only her left hand, moving at a glacial pace, she unlatched the door and pushed it open. The damp, frigid air rushed into the warm cabin of the SUV, accompanied by the aggressive, booming voice of Officer Brandon K. Hale. Hale was a veteran of the force, a man whose personnel file, though Jasmine didn't know it yet, was littered with excessive force complaints and administrative warnings that had miraculously never resulted in termination. His partner, Officer Corey Bennett, a rookie with barely months on the street, stood rigidly on the passenger side, mirroring his senior officer's aggressive posture. "Step out! Keep those hands where I can see them," Hale barked, his hand unclasping the retention strap on his holster. "I am stepping out," Jasmine said, her voice remarkably steady. Her tone wasn't just calm, it was authoritative, laced with the icy diction of a woman accustomed to controlling federal courtrooms. She placed one designer heel on the concrete, then the other, rising to her full height. She was dressed in a tailored charcoal gray Armani suit, a stark contrast to the typical attire of a midnight burglar. "Turn around and face the vehicle. Do not move," Hale commanded. He stepped forward, closing the distance, his flashlight still trained directly on her face, blinding her. Jasmine did not turn around. She stood her ground, her hands raised just above her shoulders. "Officers, you are on my private property. I live here. This is my vehicle and this is my home. You have broken the plane of my garage without a warrant or probable cause. I suggest you lower your voices and tell me exactly why you are trespassing." Hale paused for a fraction of a second, clearly thrown off by her vocabulary and complete lack of fear. But his ego, heavily fortified by the badge on his chest, quickly recovered. He took another step forward, his jaw tight. "Listen to me very carefully," Hale sneered, pointing a thick finger at her. "We got a call about a burglary in progress. You pull into a dark house in a luxury car in this neighborhood. You don't live here. Now turn around and put your hands on the roof of the car before I put you on the concrete myself." Jasmine's eyes narrowed. The blatant, thinly veiled racism hung in the air like a foul odor. "You don't live here." It was the same tired assumption, the same prejudiced calculus that led to the very civil rights investigations she spearheaded on a daily basis. "I am not placing my hands on my vehicle, and I am not turning around," Jasmine stated, her voice dropping an octave, radiating absolute authority. "I am the lawful owner of this residence. My name is Jasmine Langston. I have committed no crime, nor are there any articulable facts to support a reasonable suspicion that a crime has been committed. By ordering me to submit to a physical search in my own home, you are violating my Fourth Amendment rights under the Constitution. Now take your hand off your weapon, officer." Officer Bennett, the rookie on the passenger side, shifted uncomfortably. He glanced at Hale. The woman didn't sound like a car thief. She sounded like a judge. But Hale was seeing red. His authority had been challenged by someone he had already mentally categorized as a suspect. "I'm not going to tell you again," Hale shouted, pulling his handcuffs from his belt with a metallic clatter. "You are being detained for suspicion of burglary and grand theft auto. You're going in cuffs until we figure out who you really are. If you place those handcuffs on me, officer, you will be initiating a false arrest and an unlawful detention under the color of law," Jasmine warned, her gaze locking directly onto Hale's eyes. She didn't flinch. "I strongly advise you to de-escalate. Ask for my identification. Do your job properly, or I promise you the legal consequences will be catastrophic for you." Hale laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. "You're going to lecture me on the law, lady. You people always have a script. I know my rights, I know the law. Save it for the public defender." He reached out, grabbing her left wrist with a heavy, forceful grip, attempting to twist her arm behind her back. Jasmine did not resist physically, but she didn't yield either. She locked her elbow, standing firm. "Officer Hale," she read his nameplate under the glare of the garage lights. "I'm going to reach into my jacket pocket. I'm going to pull out my wallet. It contains my driver's license, which shows this exact address. It also contains something else that you need to look at very, very closely." "You reach into your jacket and we're going to have a serious problem," Bennett yelled from the other side, drawing his taser and pointing the red laser dot directly at Jasmine's chest. "I am moving at a fraction of normal speed," Jasmine said calmly, maintaining eye contact with Hale, ignoring the laser dancing on her suit jacket. "My right hand is moving to my left breast pocket. I am retrieving my wallet. Nothing else." Hale, perhaps slightly unnerved by her sheer mechanical calmness, didn't tackle her. He kept his grip on her left wrist, but watched as she slowly slid 2 fingers into her tailored jacket. She extracted a sleek black leather trifold wallet. "Open it," Hale demanded, "and hand me the ID. No sudden moves." Jasmine flipped the wallet open. On the right side, tucked behind a clear plastic window, was her Maryland driver's license. But she didn't hand him the license first. With her thumb, she flipped the center leather flap downward. Pinned to the heavy leather was a solid gold gleaming badge featuring the Great Seal of the United States. Beneath it, a secure federal holographic identification card bore her photograph. The bold, unmissable black text across the top of the card read, "United States Department of Justice." Beneath her name, her title was printed in crisp lettering, Deputy Assistant Attorney General, Civil Rights Division. Jasmine extended her right hand, holding the open wallet inches from Hale's face. "Read it," she commanded softly. It wasn't a request. It was an order from an apex predator of the legal system. "Read it out loud, Officer Hale." The garage was suddenly deathly quiet, save for the rhythmic drumming of the rain outside and the static crackle of the police radio on Hale's shoulder. Hale leaned in, his eyes squinting against the glare of the overhead garage lights. He looked at the gold badge. His eyes darted down to the holographic DOJ credentials. He blinked, his brain struggling to process the impossible reality in front of him. The woman he was manhandling, the woman he had just accused of being a common car thief and threatened to throw onto the concrete, was one of the highest-ranking federal law enforcement officials in the country. "Department of—" Hale started, his voice suddenly sounding dry and raspy. He swallowed hard. The belligerent confidence that had puffed out his chest just seconds prior completely evaporated, replaced by a sudden, sickening dread. "Justice. Keep reading," Jasmine said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet whisper. "Read the title." "Deputy Assistant Attorney General," Hale mumbled. His hand, which had been gripping Jasmine's wrist with bruising force, suddenly sprang open as if he had touched a hot stove. He took a hasty step backward, nearly tripping over his own boots. Officer Bennett, who still had his taser drawn and pointed at Jasmine's chest, saw the blood drain entirely from his senior partner's face. "Jenkins, Hale, what is it? Is it a fake?" "Put the taser away, Bennett," Hale snapped, his voice trembling slightly. "Put it away right now." Bennett lowered the weapon, confusion washing over his young face as he holstered it. Jasmine slowly lowered her arms. She adjusted her jacket cuffs, deliberately smoothing out the wrinkles where Hale had grabbed her. She slipped her wallet back into her pocket. The dynamic in the garage had flipped so violently and completely that the air pressure itself seemed to have changed. "Now," Jasmine said, taking a deliberate step toward Hale. The officer instinctively retreated. "Let us review exactly what occurred here tonight. You bypassed the perimeter of my property without a warrant. You initiated an investigatory stop without reasonable articulable suspicion. relying entirely on a biased assumption fed to you by a dispatcher or a neighbor. You threatened me with lethal force. You threatened me with physical violence. You unlawfully detained me. And when I attempted to inform you of my legal residency, you told me, and I quote, "You people always have a script." Hale opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked like a man standing on the trapdoor of a gallows. "I want your supervisor here. Now," Jasmine demanded. "Ma'am, listen. We received a 911 call about a possible B&E in progress," Hale stammered, desperately trying to construct a defense. "We were just doing our duty to protect the neighborhood. It was dark. You fit the description." "I fit the description of what, Officer Hale?" Jasmine cut him off, her tone razor sharp. "A homeowner in a business suit? A woman driving her own vehicle into her own garage? Or did I simply fit the description of someone who doesn't look like they belong in Somerset? Do not insult my intelligence. Call your watch commander, immediately." Bennett, realizing the magnitude of the disaster, reached for his radio. "Dispatch 4 Adam 2. Request a supervisor to the Langston residence. Code 4 on the suspect. It's a misunderstanding." "It is not a misunderstanding," Jasmine corrected him sharply. "It is a civil rights violation under Title 18, U.S.C., Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. And you, Officer Bennett, just pointed a conductive electrical weapon at a federal prosecutor." Bennett went pale. He looked at Hale for support, but Hale was staring at the floor, his career flashing before his eyes. Within a short time, a black Ford Explorer Interceptor screeched to a halt at the edge of the driveway. Sergeant William Brody, a veteran with salt and pepper hair, jogged up the driveway through the rain. He took one look at his two officers standing like reprimanded schoolchildren, and then looked at the elegant, furious woman standing by the BMW. "Officers, what is going on here?" Brody asked, his eyes darting between them. Jasmine didn't let them answer. She stepped forward and extended her hand, though not to shake. She flipped open her wallet again. "Sergeant Brody, my name is Jasmine Langston. I am a Deputy Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division of the DOJ." Brody looked at the badge, and a look of absolute horror washed over his face. He knew exactly who she was. The name Jasmine Langston was infamous in police departments nationwide. She was the architect behind half a dozen federal consent decrees that had gutted and restructured corrupt police forces from coast to coast. But what Sergeant Brody knew, and what made his stomach churn with absolute terror, was a secret that hadn't yet been released to the public. The DOJ had recently opened a preliminary quiet inquiry into the Montgomery County Police Department regarding a statistically impossible disparity in traffic stops and use of force against minorities in affluent neighborhoods. Jasmine Langston wasn't just a federal prosecutor. She was the exact federal prosecutor who was currently building a massive federal case against their specific department. "Miss Langston," Sergeant Brody said, his voice instantly deferential, stripping away all police bravado. "I am incredibly sorry. There has clearly been a massive breakdown in protocol here. We received a call from a neighbor." "A neighbor's racist paranoia does not override the Fourth Amendment, Sergeant," Jasmine said coldly. "Your officers bypassed basic investigative procedures. They resorted immediately to threats of violence. Officer Hale here physically assaulted me, while Officer Bennett held me at gunpoint with a taser." "Assaulted?" Brody whipped his head around to glare at Hale. "You put your hands on her?" "I was securing the scene," Hale pleaded weakly. "She wouldn't put her hands on the car." "Because she was under no legal obligation to do so," Jasmine fired back. She pulled out her smartphone and tapped the screen. "Furthermore, Sergeant Brody, you should know that my home is equipped with a state-of-the-art security system. Everything that happened in this garage from the moment your officers broke the sensor beam has been recorded in high-definition video and audio. It has already been uploaded to a secure cloud server." Hale's knees actually buckled slightly. He reached out to steady himself against the side of the police cruiser. It was over. He knew it was over. "Miss Langston, what can we do to make this right?" Brody asked, his tone now a desperate plea for damage control. He knew that if this video reached the media, or worse, the Attorney General's desk, the department would be burned to the ground. Jasmine looked at the three men. She thought about all the case files on her desk. She thought about the thousands of people who didn't have gold badges to pull out of their pockets when the police treated them like criminals in their own neighborhoods. People who ended up handcuffed, beaten, or worse, simply for existing in spaces where someone else decided they didn't belong. She smiled, but it was a cold, predatory expression. "Make it right," Jasmine echoed, her eyes gleaming with the full crushing weight of the federal government. "Sergeant Brody, you don't have the authority to make this right, but I do." Sergeant William Brody stood in the pouring rain, watching the taillights of Jasmine Langston's BMW flash as she finally pulled the vehicle fully into the garage. The heavy mahogany door descended with a loud, final thud, effectively slamming shut on the careers of the two officers standing frozen on the driveway. Brody turned to Hale and Bennett. The rookie, Bennett, was hyperventilating, his hands planted on his knees as if he were going to be sick on the manicured lawn. Hale simply stared into the middle distance, the color completely drained from his face. "Get in the cruisers," Brody ordered, his voice devoid of any camaraderie. "Return to the precinct. Turn in your badges, your weapons, and your body cameras to the desk, Sergeant. You are both suspended, pending an immediate internal affairs investigation. Do not speak to each other. Do not speak to the union rep until I say so. Move." Inside her home, the adrenaline finally crashed. Jasmine locked the door leading from the garage into her mudroom, leaned against the heavy oak wood, and let out a long, shaky breath. Her hands, which had been steady as stone while staring down the barrel of a taser, were now trembling uncontrollably. She closed her eyes, allowing herself a moment to process the raw human terror of what had just occurred. She knew how easily Hale could have pulled the trigger. She knew how quickly a misunderstanding could have turned into a press conference where police spokesmen discussed her sudden movements or aggressive posture. But she had survived, and now the predator was awake. Jasmine walked into her kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and immediately opened her encrypted federal laptop. It was late. She bypassed her usual sleep schedule and logged directly into the DOJ's secure server. She accessed her home security system's cloud storage, downloading the 4 different angles of the garage confrontation in high-definition video and crisp audio. Next, she drafted an emergency email to her direct superior, Arthur Pendleton, the Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division. She attached the video files and wrote a brief clinical summary of the encounter. But Jasmine wasn't just building a case about her own assault. Her brilliant analytical mind had already connected a terrifying dot. For recent months, Jasmine had been leading a covert preliminary inquiry into the Montgomery County Police Department based on a whistleblower tip. A confidential informant from within the precinct had alleged that a specific group of veteran officers had a long-standing history of using excessive force against minorities during traffic stops and field interviews, and that the department's Internal Affairs Division was actively shredding the complaints. The whistleblower had provided badge numbers but no names. Jasmine opened her encrypted case file and cross-referenced the badge numbers the informant had flagged. Her eyes narrowed as she scrolled down the spreadsheet. There it was, badge number matching Officer Brandon K. Hale. Hale wasn't just a bad apple who had made a mistake in her garage. He was the linchpin of the exact federal corruption investigation she had been quietly building. By assaulting a deputy assistant attorney general, Hale hadn't just broken the law. He had handed the Department of Justice the golden key to tear his entire department apart. Early the next morning, the polished oak doors of Chief Robert Henderson's office at the Montgomery County Police Headquarters swung violently open. Sergeant Brody stood in the doorway, clutching a manila folder, looking like he hadn't slept. "Chief, we have a catastrophic situation," Brody said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. Chief Henderson, a politician in a uniform who cared more about his public image than his officers, looked up from his coffee. "What is it, David?" Brody walked over, opened the folder, and placed a printed still frame from Officer Bennett's body camera on the desk. It showed Jasmine Langston standing in her tailored suit, holding open her wallet to display the gold DOJ badge. Last night, Hale and Bennett responded to a 911 call from a neighbor in Somerset. Brody explained grimly. They initiated a felony stop on a homeowner pulling into her own garage. Hale went hands-on. Bennett drew his taser. They didn't ask for ID until they had already threatened lethal force. Henderson frowned. A bad stop will put them on desk duty. Issue an apology. Maybe a small settlement if she sues. Chief, you aren't listening, Brody interrupted, tapping a heavy finger on the photograph. Look at the ID. The homeowner is Jasmine Langston. She is the Deputy Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights. She's the woman who just gutted major departments with federal consent decrees. And she has the entire encounter on high-definition home security footage. Henderson's coffee cup slipped from his hand, shattering on the hardwood floor and splashing dark liquid across his polished shoes. He stared at the gold badge in the photograph, his breathing suddenly shallow. "Oh my God," Henderson whispered. "It gets worse," Brody said quietly. "I ran the dispatch logs this morning. The 911 caller. I looked at her file. Do you know who she is?" Henderson shook his head, dread pooling in his stomach. "She is Deputy Chief Gregory Langley's sister-in-law," Brody revealed. "And according to the CAD notes, dispatch tried to clear the call as a low-priority suspicious vehicle because the license plate matched the registered homeowner, but the call was manually overridden and upgraded to a burglary in progress by a watch commander." Henderson felt the room spin. The 911 call hadn't been a mistake. It had been intentionally escalated by someone in his own command staff as a favor to a paranoid relative, and they had unleashed their most aggressive officers on a high-ranking federal prosecutor. "Get the union involved immediately," Henderson ordered, his voice trembling as he reached for a towel to wipe up the spilled coffee. "We have to bury this before she takes it to a grand jury." That afternoon, a tense, suffocating silence filled the conference room on the 5th floor of the federal courthouse in downtown Washington, D.C. Chief Robert Henderson sat at the long mahogany table, sweating through his uniform shirt. Next to him sat Benjamin Carter, the belligerent president of the police union, a man who had built his career on aggressively defending bad cops through technicalities, media spin, and political bullying. Across the table sat Jasmine Langston. She looked immaculate, wearing a sharp navy blue blazer, her face an unreadable mask of professional detachment. Beside her sat Arthur Pendleton, the Assistant Attorney General, looking over a pair of reading glasses with the terrifying calm of a judge about to hand down a life sentence. "Listen, Jasmine. Miss Langston," Benjamin Carter began, leaning forward and resting his thick forearms on the table. He attempted to use his signature mix of folksy charm and subtle intimidation. "We all agree that last night was a regrettable misunderstanding. It was dark, raining, and the officers were acting on dispatched information regarding a potential felony. They were operating under high stress." Jasmine didn't blink. "Benjamin, do not insult me. I have prosecuted cartels and corrupt politicians. Your folksy union rhetoric will not work here. Officer Hale did not make a mistake. He executed a racially motivated unconstitutional seizure and escalated to physical violence because his ego was bruised when a black woman did not immediately cower." Carter's face flushed. "Now hold on a minute. Hale has a family. He's a decorated officer. We are prepared to offer a formal written apology from the department. We will agree to a short, unpaid suspension for Hale and mandatory de-escalation training for Bennett. In exchange, we ask that the DOJ declines to file formal civil rights charges, and we keep this out of the press." Arthur Pendleton chuckled, a dry, humorless sound that echoed off the wood-paneled walls. He slid a thick black binder across the table toward Chief Henderson. "Mr. Carter," Arthur said softly, "you seem to be under the delusion that this is a negotiation. It is not. Open the binder, Chief." Henderson's trembling hands flipped the binder open. Inside were hundreds of pages of internal emails, whistleblower testimony, and dispatch logs. "This morning we subpoenaed the unedited audio of the 911 call placed by the neighbor," Jasmine stated, her voice slicing through the room like a scalpel. "The caller did not report a burglary. On the unredacted tape, she specifically tells the dispatcher that the woman who bought the house is pulling into the garage, and she doesn't like the look of her. Send a cruiser to scare her off." Chief Henderson squeezed his eyes shut. The caller knew exactly who I was, Jasmine continued. She knew I owned the home. She weaponized the police department to harass me. But what elevates this from a local nuisance to a federal conspiracy is what happened next. The dispatcher logged it as a non-emergency. But moments later, Deputy Chief Gregory Langley, the caller's brother-in-law, logged into the computer-aided dispatch system from his home computer and manually upgraded the call to a Priority 1 felony in progress, deliberately bypassing patrol units and dispatching Hale. Benjamin Carter's jaw went slack. He looked at Henderson. "Is that true, Chief?" Henderson didn't answer. He just stared at the binder in horror. "Why Hale?" Jasmine asked rhetorically, leaning forward. "Why did Deputy Chief Langley specifically dispatch Officer Brandon K. Hale to handle a favor for his sister-in-law? We wondered about that. So we looked into Hale's sealed internal affairs file. The one you, Mr. Carter, fought so hard to keep hidden." Jasmine reached into her own briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper, sliding it across the table. "Badge number matching Officer Hale," she read aloud. "Hale has multiple sustained complaints of excessive force against minority drivers in recent years, and in every single instance, the reviewing officer who cleared him of wrongdoing and buried the complaint was Deputy Chief Gregory Langley. They are running a protection racket." The room was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning sounded like a jet engine. Carter slumped back in his chair, his aggressive posturing completely shattered. He realized with horrifying clarity that he wasn't here to negotiate a suspension. He was here to attend the funeral of his police department. "You didn't just assault a federal prosecutor, Chief Henderson," Arthur Pendleton said coldly. "Your department handed us the definitive proof of a systemic top-down conspiracy to violate the civil rights of Montgomery County residents under the color of law." Jasmine stood up, buttoning her blazer. She looked down at the two men, her eyes burning with a righteous icy fire. "Here are my terms," Jasmine dictated, her voice echoing with absolute finality. "By the deadline today, Officer Hale and Deputy Chief Langley will be stripped of their police powers and terminated. Tomorrow morning, they will both be indicted by a federal grand jury for deprivation of rights under color of law and obstruction of justice. Officer Bennett will resign immediately and agree to testify against them in exchange for immunity." Carter opened his mouth, trying to salvage something, anything. "And as for the department, Chief," Jasmine whispered, leaning over the table, planting her hands flat on the mahogany surface, bringing her face inches from Henderson's. "The United States Department of Justice is placing Montgomery County under a federal consent decree. We are taking over your internal affairs division, your hiring protocols, and your use of force review boards. I will be auditing every single arrest your officers have made in recent years. If you attempt to block me, delete a single email, or fight this in court, I will personally see to it that you face federal RICO charges." She stood back up, picked up her briefcase, and looked at Arthur. "We are done here." The heavy mahogany doors of the federal courthouse clicked shut, sealing Chief Robert Henderson and Union President Benjamin Carter in the marble hallway. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The air conditioning in the corridor was freezing, yet sweat poured down Henderson's neck, soaking the stiff collar of his uniform. The absolute uncompromising reality of Jasmine Langston's ultimatum hung over them like a guillotine. "Chief, listen to me," Carter finally hissed, grabbing the police chief by the elbow and dragging him toward the elevators. "She's bluffing. The DOJ does not move this fast. She's angry. She's flexing her federal muscle, but she cannot legally dismantle an entire police department in hours without a judge signing off. We fight this. We go to the press. We spin it as a misunderstanding. And we get the mayor on the phone." Henderson looked at the union boss with hollow eyes. "Benjamin, did you not just read that file? They have Gregory Langley dead to rights. They have his IP address on the CAD override. They have multiple buried complaints on Hale. If we fight this, she's going to indict me for RICO. Only if they have time to build the case," Carter countered desperately as the elevator doors chimed open. "You call Mayor Campbell, right now. Richard Campbell owes his entire re-election campaign to our police union endorsement. You tell him to call his contacts in the Senate. We put political pressure on the Attorney General to rein in this rogue prosecutor before she destroys the county. Desperation is a powerful hallucinogen, and Henderson took the dose. Sitting in the back of his chauffeured police cruiser, he dialed Mayor David Campbell. Campbell, a shrewd, image-obsessed politician, listened to the frantic explanation with growing horror. However, calculating that losing the police union's backing would spell his political doom, the mayor agreed to intervene. "Sit tight, Chief," Campbell promised smoothly over the phone. "I'm going to make a call to the senator's office. We'll get a lid on this. Langston is a deputy assistant. She still has bosses. Nobody wants a federal scandal during an election year." What neither Chief Henderson, Benjamin Carter, nor Mayor Campbell realized was that Jasmine Langston did not play politics. She played the law, and she was 5 steps ahead of them. Late that afternoon, an hour before Jasmine's deadline, Mayor Campbell sat in his spacious City Hall office, waiting for a return call from the senator. Instead, his private line rang. The caller ID read, "Department of Justice, Office of the Attorney General." Campbell cleared his throat and answered, expecting to negotiate a political compromise. "Mayor Campbell speaking." "Mayor Campbell, this is Arthur Pendleton, Assistant Attorney General," the voice on the other end said. It was cold, flat, and entirely devoid of political warmth. "I am calling to issue a formal courtesy notification. We are aware you have been making inquiries regarding an active federal civil rights investigation being spearheaded by Deputy Assistant Langston." "Well, Arthur, I was just trying to facilitate a smoother—" "Do not speak, Mayor," Pendleton interrupted sharply, his voice cracking like a whip. "Listen, if you make one more phone call, if you send one more email, or if you take one single action to interfere with or obstruct this investigation, I will personally draft an indictment charging you with federal obstruction of justice and conspiracy. Do you understand me? You will be frog-marched out of City Hall in handcuffs before the evening news." Campbell's blood ran ice cold. The phone slipped slightly in his sweaty grip. I understand, Mr. Pendleton." "Good. Have a pleasant afternoon." The line went dead. Campbell immediately dialed Chief Henderson. When Henderson answered, the mayor spoke only 3 words before hanging up for good. "You're on your own." The deadline passed. Chief Henderson, paralyzed by fear and completely abandoned by his political allies, failed to terminate Hale and Langley. He couldn't bring himself to sign the paperwork, hoping against hope that more time would buy them mercy. It was the final fatal miscalculation. At dawn the following morning, the quiet, affluent suburb was shattered by the roaring engines of armored FBI vehicles. They swarmed the sprawling, gated property of Deputy Chief Gregory Langley. Inside his master bathroom, Langley was standing over the toilet in his silk pajamas, frantically trying to smash a cryptographic hard drive with a hammer before flushing the magnetic disks. He had been tipped off by a sympathetic dispatcher that federal warrants were being processed. He never got the chance to destroy the evidence. The heavy oak front door of his mansion exploded inward under the force of a battering ram. Flashbang grenades detonated in the grand foyer, blowing out the imported stained glass windows and filling the house with blinding light and deafening thunder. "FBI! Federal agents! Show me your hands!" A team of heavily armed tactical agents flooded up the curved staircase. They breached the master suite, finding Langley covered in sweat and pulverized plastic shards. Within seconds, the deputy chief of police was thrown face first onto his expensive Persian rug, his hands violently zipped behind his back. Simultaneously, a short distance away, Officer Brandon K. Hale was awakened not by his alarm clock, but by the barrel of an M4 rifle pressing against his cheek. Hale had fallen asleep on his couch, an empty bottle of bourbon on the coffee table. He didn't fight. He didn't scream. As the federal agents hauled him to his feet in his undershirt and boxer shorts, Hale began to weep uncontrollably, the crushing weight of his destroyed life finally breaking him. The E. Barrett Prettyman United States Courthouse in Washington, D.C., had been transformed into an impenetrable fortress of media satellite trucks, flashing camera bulbs, and screaming reporters. The scandal had broken nationwide with the force of a Category 5 hurricane. The explosive story of a rogue, racially motivated police unit attempting to terrorize a high-ranking black DOJ attorney only to trigger a massive federal takedown of their own department was dominating the chyrons of every major news network. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense, the air thick with the gravity of federal prosecution. Judge Marcus Thorne, a no-nonsense jurist with decades on the federal bench and zero tolerance for institutional corruption, presided over the arraignment. His gavel struck the heavy wooden block with a sharp, echoing crack that silenced the murmuring gallery. Officer Corey Bennett had resigned exactly as Jasmine had demanded. The young rookie, terrified by the prospect of a federal cage, had taken a sweeping immunity deal. He sat in the witness box and sang like a canary, detailing not only the harrowing incident in Jasmine's garage, but a dozen other traffic stops where Officer Brandon K. Hale had ordered him to falsify reports, plant evidence, or intentionally escalate situations with minority drivers. Hale, completely broken, sat at the defense table wearing a bright orange Department of Corrections jumpsuit. The aggressive, chest-puffing bravado he had displayed while gripping Jasmine's wrist in the dark was entirely gone. He looked small, hollowed out, and violently trembling. He had tried through his desperate defense attorney to secure a last-minute plea deal, but Jasmine Langston, seated with immaculate posture at the prosecution table in a tailored black suit, refused to offer him even an inch of leniency. The United States seeks the absolute maximum penalty under Title 18, Section 242, Your Honor, Jasmine stated clearly, her voice echoing off the mahogany-paneled walls. She stood before the judge, a paragon of unrelenting legal authority. Officer Hale did not just violate the rights of a single citizen on a rainy night. He acted as the militant enforcer for a systemic localized criminal enterprise operating behind a police badge. He relied on the color of law to intimidate, assault, and falsely imprison the vulnerable residents of Montgomery County. To offer a plea deal would be an insult to the Constitution he swore to uphold. Judge Thorne nodded slowly, his piercing gaze shifting to the defense table. Hale stared at the floor, weeping silently. Realizing a trial would only expose him to a harsher sentence, Hale pleaded guilty to all charges. Judge Thorne showed no mercy, sentencing the disgraced officer to a lengthy term in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. But the most satisfying twist of the sprawling legal proceedings was yet to come. While the national media focused intently on the corrupt cops and the crumbling command staff, Jasmine had absolutely not forgotten the catalyst of the entire nightmare, the woman who had weaponized the police in the first place out of sheer prejudice. On a bright morning, Beatrice Langley was hosting an exclusive garden brunch for her neighborhood association. She was holding a crystal flute of expensive mimosas, standing on her pristine flagstone patio, complaining to her wealthy, pearl-clutching friends about the awful noise the news helicopters were making above their previously quiet neighborhood. The clinking of crystal glasses and the polite hushed laughter were suddenly interrupted by the heavy rhythmic marching of tactical boots. Two stern-faced FBI special agents, accompanied by a towering U.S. Marshal, stepped past the catered buffet table, ignoring the gasps of the Somerset elite. "Beatrice Langley," the lead agent asked loudly, his voice cutting through the morning air, ensuring every single one of her horrified guests could hear clearly. "Yes," Beatrice said, her voice trembling slightly as she lowered her glass, a look of profound confusion washing over her perfectly powdered face. "Who are you? What is the meaning of this intrusion?" "Ma'am, you are under arrest for violation of Title 18 U.S.C., Section 1001, making false statements to federal and local authorities, and conspiracy to deprive civil rights," the agent announced, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," Beatrice shrieked, dropping her crystal flute. It shattered into 100 pieces on the stone patio, the orange liquid pooling around her expensive designer flats. "This is a massive mistake. My brother-in-law is the deputy chief of police. You can't do this to me. I live in Somerset. Do you know who I am?" "Your brother-in-law is currently sitting in federal custody without bail, Mrs. Langley," the agent replied coldly, clamping the cuffs tightly around her wrists and locking them with a sharp click. And so are you. As she was marched out of her own backyard, sobbing hysterically in front of her country club friends, Beatrice finally understood the crushing reality that her privilege was not an impenetrable shield against federal law. The dominoes continued to fall with staggering speed. Deputy Chief Gregory Langley, faced with Bennett's damning testimony, Hale's guilty plea, and the miraculously decrypted hard drive the FBI forensic unit had recovered from his bathroom, realized he was utterly trapped. The hard drive contained an encrypted spreadsheet detailing years of suppressed internal affairs complaints alongside horrific racist emails exchanged between the precinct's command staff. Langley, out of options, took a blind plea, throwing himself on the mercy of the court. Judge Thorne, visibly disgusted by the betrayal of public trust, sentenced the former deputy chief to a lengthy term in federal prison. Chief Robert Henderson, while not directly implicated in the cover-up, was utterly disgraced by his failure to lead. Under immense pressure from a terrified Mayor David Campbell, who was desperately trying to avoid a federal obstruction charge himself, and the relentless national media, Henderson submitted his immediate unconditional resignation. He lost his lucrative pension and faded into complete shameful obscurity. Months after the terrifying rainy night in her garage, Jasmine Langston stood at a podium in the Grand Seal-embossed briefing room of the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. Behind her stood Assistant Attorney General Arthur Pendleton and the newly appointed federally mandated civilian monitor for the Montgomery County Police Department. Camera shutters fired like machine guns as Jasmine approached the cluster of microphones. She looked out at the sea of eager reporters, her posture immaculate, her expression a perfect blend of solemn duty and unyielding resolve. Today, the United States Department of Justice has officially signed a comprehensive consent decree with Montgomery County, Jasmine announced, her powerful voice echoing clearly across the live broadcast networks. This binding federal order will completely strip away the rotting infrastructure of a police department that forgot its most sacred oath to the public. We are implementing mandatory independent civilian oversight. We are completely rebuilding the Internal Affairs Division from the ground up, and we are instituting zero-tolerance use-of-force policies that will be aggressively, relentlessly audited by this office. A senior reporter from the front row eagerly raised his hand, shouting over the din. Miss Langston, given that you were personally the victim of this department's targeted corruption and violence, does this massive victory feel like personal revenge? Jasmine paused. The room fell into a breathless silence. She looked directly at the reporter, her dark eyes flashing with a profound, terrifying intellect. Revenge is an emotional response meant to satisfy a bruised ego, Jasmine replied smoothly, her voice commanding the absolute attention of every person in the room. The Department of Justice doesn't deal in revenge. We deal in the law. What happened in my garage was not an isolated incident. It was a glaring symptom of a deeply diseased system. I simply happened to be the one citizen they targeted, who had the power, the resources, and the federal authority to surgically remove that disease. This is not personal revenge. This is exactly what justice looks like when a broken system is finally forcefully held accountable. That evening, Jasmine drove her BMW back into the quiet, affluent neighborhood of Somerset Terrace. The sky was crystal clear, painted with the brilliant oranges, pinks, and deep purples of a descending sunset. She turned onto the street, her tires gliding smoothly over the pavement. There were no twitching velvet curtains at Beatrice Langley's dark, empty house down the block. There were no aggressive police cruisers waiting in the shadows to enforce an unwritten, prejudiced boundary. There was only the peaceful, hard-earned silence of her sanctuary. She pressed the button on her sun visor. The heavy mahogany garage door groaned and began its slow, steady ascent, revealing the bright, immaculate interior. She pulled her vehicle inside, shifted the car into park, and turned off the engine, listening to the quiet hum of the cooling motor. As the garage door closed behind her with a heavy, secure thud, blocking out the outside world, Jasmine Langston picked up her leather briefcase. She stepped out of her car and walked into her home. The predator had protected her territory. The law had decisively won, and tomorrow there would be more files on her desk, and more corrupt systems waiting to be dismantled. Thank you so much for reading this incredible story of justice, power, and accountability. If you loved seeing Jasmine Langston use the absolute might of the law to take down a corrupt system, please hit that like button right now. Share this video with anyone who loves a powerful real-life drama where the bad guys finally get exactly what they deserve. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our thrilling, true-to-life stories. Drop a comment below telling us what your favorite twist was. See you in the next one.